So what am I here to talk about today? I mean, today really boils down to getting into academics, being an academic professor, kind of working in clinical research settings, teaching as an adjunct and so forth. So one of the first questions that I just wanted to pose, if you're not really quite sure if that's what you want to do, is it for you? Really, unfortunately, there's really no clear answer overall. There's really no single criteria to kind of know whether it's for you or for not. I think, kind of when I look over things, every person that I've dealt with, they love learning. So they're kind of a nerd of sorts, or just kind of a student in their own right. Number two is to have a pretty strong passion and high level of excitement for your interests. And this is really important because there's many aspects of the academic day, writing, chasing research subjects, writing grants. Quite frankly, they're not the most enjoyable thing in the world. So never in my life as a high school kid did I think that I would basically be a writer, but that's what I am. I write about science, exercise, and nutrition. Fortunately, I love it. But I think consistently, so one of the things, if you kind of implore and look inside yourself, established researchers as well as very successful graduate students, they're very passionate. They're very excited about their work and the things that they do. So that would certainly be one criteria to consider. As you look at the academic jobs that are out there within strength conditioning, within the university setting, there's a number of advantages. So I'm going to highlight the advantages, and then we'll highlight some of the disadvantages as well. Flexibility with your schedule is probably one of the biggest strengths or kind of benefits of being a professor. All right, every year we have spring break. Every year we have 3 to 4 weeks off in the month of December during the holidays. Every year we're free, depending on your academic schedule, somewhere between the middle of May to the middle of August, every single year. So that is a very powerful thing to consider in the work-life balance and happiness perspective as you kind of pursue and consider careers. Another thing that's really important for me, which I find really, really cool, is the fact that I get to spend every single day reading things, studying things, interacting with projects, coordinating projects on things that I enjoy, things that I think are really cool, things that I think are fascinating. And not every job offers that. So that's a huge advantage when you look at kind of the long-term aspect of a career. Jobs in academia are pretty stable overall. There's not a lot of turnover. Oftentimes, typically if you're in a tenure track type of a position, you're pretty much there for a minimum of 3 years, oftentimes 6 years. So typical kind of tenure appointments will last for around a 6-year period. There are schools that don't grant tenure, that are kind of based on more of a merit system, and even then, many times in those situations, they're fairly stable jobs as a whole. So certainly that's a positive thing to consider. Another strong aspect is basically independence. With my job per se, I don't have a single boss that's standing over my shoulder, kind of double checking on everything that I do, kind of looking over our research and so forth. And that, just kind of from like an autonomy standpoint, is really pretty refreshing overall. And then also compensation. This is probably the most surprising, if there are any other kind of faculty members, academics in the room. But from my perspective, if you consider all of the other advantages that are pretty unique to academics, the amount of time that you have off every year, the level of compensation we receive is really quite fair. So I would definitely kind of look at that as an advantage. As to kind of just expand upon things a little bit more, this is pretty typical of myself. I've kind of gotten ahead of my, but if we break these aspects down, again, summer's off, winter break, spring break. A lot of times the flexibility, you can teach in the summer, but you don't have to. So again, if you want to have that time off, it is overall a excellent career for having a family. You have to allow it to happen though. All right, so you have to be able to walk away from work and kind of be able to devote that time to your family. Things of interest, as I said, this is a big one for me. You're able to teach and do and perform research, do projects and so forth, the things that you find interesting. Job stability I highlighted, independence as well. Again, you're largely left alone to develop your own line of research. You're not told what your research agenda needs to be. So again, you may be working alongside other faculty members and you have completely different research interests, and that's okay. It's actually oftentimes works really, really well from that aspect, because that way your students get exposed to a wide variety of backgrounds, area of interest, and so forth. And again, just a little bit more feedback on the compensation front. Like I said, this is probably the most surprising, particularly to other faculty. Most PhDs will have somewhere in the realm of 9 to 10 years of education. Starting salaries oftentimes around $55,000 to $60,000 a year. Towards the latter parts of your career, it's particularly if you stay in academics for the whole time, it is not uncommon for those salaries to get up to $90,000 to $100,000 a year by the time you retire. Put into perspective, as I said, you consider the time off, independence, freedom, stability, ability to focus on things that you like. It's a very, very rare combination for a number of jobs. My father worked a career for the state of Illinois his entire life. He had a boss that he had to answer to. He didn't necessarily get to do things that he liked. He had to show up at a certain time, leave at a certain time, and those are all things that don't necessarily that I consider to be have-tos for my job. You kind of put it into perspective with many of the other careers that are being discussed at this podium. Compensation for the most part across academics will typically be greater than most strength coaches, personal trainers, athletic trainers, and so forth. Not always, all right, but I think for the most part, I think particularly for those getting into the strength conditioning field at the collegiate level or high school level. So this is a kind of important point to consider, though. If you are going to get into academics to accumulate wealth, to be wealthy, you're probably going to end up disappointed. All right. So again, while you get paid well, it's certainly not an overwhelming strength. The disadvantages for me, because I like my job, were a little bit harder to highlight. So these are all going to be just kind of to put into perspective. There's certainly other disadvantages to consider as well. Basically, teaching load, various scholarly expectations, service expectations, teaching in the evenings, work-life balance. And then again, compensation, and I'll kind of highlight that. So from the disadvantages standpoint, to highlight the first point, all of these things here, it's important for you to consider the number of courses that you teach. We're going to get into this more detail for all the academic jobs. Scholarly expectations, that kind of refers to the amount of expectations you have for number of papers you need to publish, grant dollars you need to bring in, presentations that you need to complete in a given year, thesis or dissertations you need to be involved in, and then service expectations would be basically service obligations to your department, to your college, to your university, to your community, as well as to your profession. Again, all of these things are largely a function of the job that you have, and we're going to get into kind of more of those details in a little bit. Some people want to teach more. Some people want to do more research. Some people really, really like to serve on committees. So again, the one thing that I want everybody in this room to consider when you get done with the talk is you understand a little bit more about the different jobs, and you take a much closer look to really try to hone in on what type of environment that you want. Other people want more time for research, want less expectations for teaching and service. So again, finding that right balance to get yourself settled is really, really important for happiness, to allow you to be productive, and so forth. So again, hopefully this presentation will highlight some areas or some aspects you didn't think about before, kind of reflect on really what you want to do, and then certainly kind of choose wisely with the jobs that are available. So again, to kind of expand upon those things, again, teaching in the evenings, some people don't like that. If you have a family, you have children that are doing various activities and you have to miss it because you're in class, some people will view that as a disadvantage. Graduate courses are oftentimes in the evenings. All right, that's kind of largely due to trying to accommodate other work schedules, other family schedules, and so forth. So it certainly can present a problem. But again, in perspective, bring this gripe to a strength and conditioning coach. Bring this gripe to an athletic trainer. Or basically outside of the NSCA, our FedEx delivery guy comes by our house in Albuquerque at 7 o'clock every night. And I think to myself, that's the last thing I'd want to be doing on a Tuesday night. So again, you have to keep all of those things in perspective. Work-life balance, for me, this is the biggest disadvantage. And it's a function of my passion and my excitement. I get myself involved in way too many things. All right, so a lot of times I end up working early in the mornings, having to stay late to get things done. So again, constantly striving to have good balance is important. And for many, many people that are out there in academics, it's a challenge. It's a big challenge. Many of these people basically can't say no to things, all right? Because they love so much of what they do, or they want to make sure that who's ever in charge of it or doing it, that a quality person is behind it. So there's always another paper to write. There's always other quizzes to grade, lectures to make up, emails to respond to, and so forth. And again, I'm not standing up here saying that this is unique, poor is us, woe is us, and so forth. These are just kind of identified disadvantages. Basically, all of these things, basically from a work-life balance standpoint, it certainly can be done. There's people out there that have a very, very good balance of sort. But I've got some work to do, all right, because I love what I do. So I end up kind of working quite a bit. So for many, many people, this is kind of an ongoing area of personal growth, let's say. So compensation, I'm well aware that I've put that on both the advantages and the disadvantages side, because I think without a doubt, if you talk to other faculty, they will voice their compensation level as a negative. All right, if you put it into perspective of oftentimes the amount of hours you have to invest, the amount of years invested with education, and you just look only at the the amount of money that you're compensated, some people can view that as a disadvantage. And really, as I said before, if you get into academics with the mindset of being very, very wealthy, you're going to end up disappointed. Personally, for myself, I value, again, that I get to do what I like. I get to do it with people who typically like those things and also want to be a part of it. So friends of mine who are bankers and salesmen, every Christmas time when I get to visit with them, they say more and more times, basically than not. I wish I was able, to go in at certain times. I wish I didn't have to. Wish I had more time off and so forth. So we have a lot of flexibility with our schedule, but there is a process to kind of get there. So these are kind of advantages and disadvantages of the endpoint of being a professor at an academic institution, whether you're on your tenure track, non-tenure track, if you're in some type of a lab director, lab coordinator role, instructor role, and so forth. From my perspective, and again, I hopefully have kind of highlighted this several times throughout, I strongly feel like all these disadvantages can easily be managed. So please don't perceive them as gripes for me. The pros of my jobs kind of certainly outweigh the cons. Now, in addition, I find the career very, very rewarding. It's really, really cool to be able to work with young people, basically to kind of give them ideas to help them learn, to help them teach more about themselves, help them to learn good life skills and good traits and so forth. The job itself, one of the things that's really neat as well is if you like to learn, you're basically in a job and in a position where you're continually learning, you're continually growing, and that for me is really, really cool. Interacting with students, helping them learn, daily highlights, weekly highlights, monthly highlights, it happens all the time. All right, so you're basically kind of put into positions to allow students to learn a little bit more about themselves. So what is the typical path? Some would argue that there is none. There is no typical path to getting into an academic career. Most positions, particularly those that are tenure track, that are at kind of four-year institutions, do require a PhD. Getting a PhD typically means, in many respects, that you want to teach. Oftentimes it means that you also want to conduct research and or do both. So it's important that you understand that. There are exceptions, jobs that do exist, absolutely. There are many, many people that have long, well-developed careers at various universities with master's degrees that teach, and they have very, very happy careers. All right, so again, for more often than not, getting a PhD, going through that aspect, kind of commands you to do a little bit more research and kind of help develop a research agenda. So a bachelor's degree, Bachelor of Science, Master of Science, PhD, if there is a typical path, that would be it. The jobs themselves, because exercise science is growing more and more into various disciplines of core sciences, are becoming more and more science-centered or science-centric. And that's important to understand, all right? Because again, if you want to get into a job, kind of working with doctoral students, with graduate programs, doing research, having a strong science background is becoming more and more important. So, 2 key factors to basically kind of get yourself on that path. Number 1, do your homework. Find places to work. This is very important. Probably one of my number 1 tips for finding a graduate program. Find places to work closely with a faculty member that is doing things that you like, things that you enjoy. That is very, very important. Personal story number 1, basically a bad approach. When I finished with my undergrad, I grew up playing high school basketball. I still love basketball to this day. I applied to the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, to get my master's degree for one reason. And that reason, right, I'm almost embarrassed, but it was because Michael Jordan went there. Seriously, Michael Jordan went there. I love basketball. It was like the basketball mecca. I'm going to go there. Be a great place to go to school. Looking back on it, all the faculty members there, they aren't doing anything that I like, all right, except for the more recent faculty. The good approach, all right, basically I got hooked up with Dr. Rick Kreider at the University of Memphis, exposed me to exercise and nutrition research, sport nutrition research, and basically doors have opened, things have taken off since then. All right, so so it's kind of both basically a bad approach and a good approach. Find a program where you can get some financial assistance. All right, there are a lot of graduate assistants out there. All right, so again, kind of do your homework, take whatever assistance you can get, and then basically take advantage of it and go with it. Other factors to consider. So again, if you're going to get into an academic role, doing teaching, doing research, during those graduate experiences, will you get teaching experience? Nearly every academic job is going to involve you to be a teacher and expect you to be a good teacher. So it makes sense to find a graduate program where you can get some teaching experience. Additionally, with graduate programs, this is one of my favorite sayings, a graduate program is going to be largely what you make of it. All right? You can go into the best program and take a haphazard approach, not be reliable, not be dependable, do the absolute minimum. You're going to get the absolute minimum out of that program. It's really not that much different about anything else. All right? But again, if you do adopt a blue-collar mentality, work harder than most folks, be reliable, work hard, be early, be helpful, be present. That's when doors and opportunities are going to open. That's when you're going to learn. That's when you're going to get your name on abstracts, get your name on publications, find out more and learn more about yourself as well as the field. Every very productive academic colleague that I've ever known, all right, has worked very, very hard at their craft. So again, it's not a job where you typically will get the most out of it by doing the minimum, which really isn't that uncommon. Other questions that will commonly come up, particularly for students that are engaged in a doctoral program, should you pursue postdoctoral studies, postdoctoral training? All right, so typically a PhD program is going to be 3 to 4 years. Postdoctoral training is going to be anywhere from commonly a 2 to 4 year period after your PhD, where you'll get additional research training, additional mentorship on writing grants, writing publications, and so forth. So again, many people really kind of start to get tired, start to get fatigued. You've been in school for a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, a PhD, to go on and do a postdoc. It's not really something they want to do. They're at the age where maybe they're getting married, they want to have kids. So again, the considerations there really be typically at larger schools is where postdocs occur, very large clinical research centers, very, very well-populated areas. is where many of these oftentimes are. You'll work with established researchers. And again, we'll get into this later, but the type of academic job that you want is really going to be what I consider to be the most critical factor for whether you need to do a postdoc. And I'll circle back around and highlight that. It is important to highlight that if you want to work at a smaller school and predominantly teach, that you can hyper specialize yourself out of a job by going to a postdoc, because you're basically, all of your research training is too specialized, so other schools basically can't support you. So that's important to consider. My story itself, so basically I finished with my PhD at Baylor University, had a lot of experience with exercise and nutrition research, and I was very strongly considering doing a postdoc. Back in St. Louis at WashU, it's a huge clinical research center, because I really wanted to get into a job that had a predominant research focus with some teaching. So I basically worked to secure a postdoc with a very well-established researcher, but then I went out and applied for the jobs that I really wanted to get, and I was fortunate to get a position at the University of Oklahoma. So I didn't do a postdoc, but I know of basically many people. One of those that I wanted to highlight, so my first doctoral student coming out of the University of Oklahoma, his name's Mike Roberts. Great scientist, great individual. He was dead set on doing a postdoc. He did a postdoc at the University of Missouri with Dr. Frank Booth. He had a fabulous experience. He learned a lot. He learned a lot about being a scientist, learned a lot more about different aspects of research, and he now has a very, very strong position at Auburn University. So again, it all depends upon the path that you want to take. The bottom line, if you want to do a postdoc, find a good match. Again, get yourself into experience where you're going to learn new things. Don't get into a postdoc and just get more experience doing the things that you've already done. That is not worth your time. Get into a postdoc where you're going to learn how to write grants, where you're going to learn how to basically get involved with more research work, kind of learn additional research techniques and so forth. Basically make it worth your time. Because again, you're going to be in your late 20s, early 30s for another 2 to 4 year period, not making as much money as you can. So those are it needs to be a very, very good fit for you. So this now starts the most important part of the most important part of my presentation, finding the right fit. I'm going to highlight some different jobs for my students that are out there. You know, they've certainly kind of heard me talk about this as well. So finding the right fit, it's important to understand though, because of family interests, because of various things, that the ideal job for you may certainly change. So certainly understand that it is important to be able to stay flexible. All right, so job number one is basically research-only jobs. There's jobs out there where all that you do is research. That's it. You are basically a funding machine. You're basically bringing in as much external funding for that school as possible. There's little to no teaching at these types of jobs, and we'll kind of highlight that a little bit more. Job number two are going to be jobs with what I call definite research expectations. All right, certainly people that get these jobs, they are already going to have established themselves as someone with the ability to be productive as a researcher, but they're going to be asked to teach anywhere from 1 to 3 classes every semester. It all depends upon the school. There's a large number of schools that are out there. Job number three, basically we're getting into more teaching and less research. Again, with these jobs, you're going to teach multiple classes. Oftentimes it'll be somewhere in the realm of 3 to 4 classes a semester with very minor research expectations. Typically these types of jobs, they won't have a PhD program. They may have a small master's program where you're basically kind of asked to advise thesis and so forth. And then finally, job number 4, basically teaching only. All right, undergraduate only jobs, you have largely no research expectations. You may teach anywhere from 4 to 5 classes a semester. And again, these 4 categories largely comprise the number of different jobs that are out there within the academic sector within strength and conditioning. Okay, so a little bit more detail about each of those jobs. Category 1, as I said, advantages, these people get paid more. All right, they typically will have much higher salaries. It is not uncommon for them to start out at 6 figures, basically funded in part largely by your grants. All right, so if you're not bringing in grant money, all right, the school's going to be looking at you like, well, where's your funding going to come from for your salary? All right, so these people oftentimes will fund anywhere from up to 60 to 70% of their own salary from their grants. So you better be good at getting research money. Very little teaching. All All right, the individual that I would have postdoc with at WashU, his teaching assignment was to teach 2 lectures a year on skeletal muscle physiology, his area of expertise. All right, so much, much different. These jobs are going to be all at large, very large, major clinical research institutions. From a research side of things, you have generous amounts of lab space, lab startup funds, and other resources to help establish your program. All right, postdoc more than not is required. It is definitely more of the exception to not have a postdoc at these types of jobs. Existing funding is often required. I will often categorize these jobs as basically get funded or get fired. All right, so if you're not bringing in money, your dean will show you the door at some point in time. It's also important to highlight, next to no people, all right, I've been pretty heavily involved in the research world of the NSCA, next to no people in the NSCA have these types of jobs. Job number 2, large state schools, flagship schools, University of Oklahoma, University of Connecticut, University of Texas, Texas A&M, flagship schools, often have graduate programs, PhD programs, require the development, absolutely require the development of a productive research program. If you're not a productive researcher, you're gonna have a hard time getting a job here. Teach on average 2 classes a semester, sometimes 1 class a semester, sometimes 2. Typically some type of startup package. So startup packages, for those that aren't basically familiar with the term, universities will give you sometimes a small chunk of money or sometimes a large chunk of money to help you buy equipment, help you to buy expendables and so forth to get your research program going. There are many, many established researchers that are active in the NSCA that work at these types of institutions, and we oftentimes categorize these jobs as publish or perish. All right, so again, you have some research expectations. They're really more interested in you really kind of publishing your work and developing a productive research program. Category 3, often it's state-funded schools, oftentimes regional schools, Missouri State University, Illinois State University. So basically, again, state-funded regional schools per se. These schools more often than not will demand that you are committed to teaching, have a slightly higher teaching expectation, anywhere from 3 to 4 classes. 4 might be on the high end for some jobs, oftentimes around 3. For research expectations for these jobs here, basically minimal, but oftentimes a very functional research activity, research program. But really overall pretty minimal pressure to produce, funding, minimal publication expectations, but they are defined. Oftentimes just a master's program. These programs are typically going to be smaller, have a much more personal feel. Basically the program's philosophy is going to be more about the students, less about scholarly production, research production, funding production, and so forth. You have more advising responsibilities, kind of helping the students out with their degree programs. Many very productive, well-established colleagues in the NSCA. And then lastly, category 4, nearly exclusively at small public or private schools, often liberal arts centered. Next to no research expectations occur at these types of jobs. You have to be a teacher first, a great teacher. You have to love teaching, love working with students, love advising students and so forth. Other considerations, internal support, basically small travel grants, small research grants, travel support to come to conferences, startup research packages. These are all things that you should be prepared to answer questions about as you go forward. As you look into a job or kind of look into a setting as you're finishing your graduate degree, take a good look at the infrastructure that's in place. How many other faculty are there? What type of equipment do they have? What type of funding do they have for equipment? What types of degree programs do they in place? Freedom overall, basically freedom to develop your research program, basically freedom to teach in the areas that you like. The IRB, basically every researcher has to go through the IRB. You can't get around it. It's an absolute must. Larger universities oftentimes will have a little bit more of kind of a bureaucratic political process with their IRBs. Oftentimes small schools have a little bit more of a liberal approach. So again, a lot of that depends upon the level of complexity or invasiveness for the projects. Pay scale, summer teaching, is it available? Basically, again, as I said early on in my talk, think about these things very early, work hard at what you do, stay productive, and you should really have options, even if you do start your career and you think you wanted to do more research, but then you get going, you're not necessarily kind of jiving with that environment, and you want to move on to an environment that involves more teaching and so forth. making an impact within basically kind of a scholarly or academic structure. Basically, don't do these things. Basically, be a good colleague, be open-minded, be a part of solutions and not problems, all right? Don't put yourself on an island, silo yourself, all right? Work with students, work with other colleagues. It will absolutely pay dividends. Collaborate with folks across here. I love to talk to other faculty. As a matter of fact, I can't think of many faculty or academics within the NSCA that don't like to talk to other academics about their research, to help them out, to give them tips and so forth. Come to these meetings, collaborate, connect, make connections, and kind of build your own program. These types of things go a very, very, very long way in developing collegiality, basically developing allies as you go about trying to build your own program and research program and so forth. Honing your craft, additional aspects. This is very much a process, and this is a very important message for any young people out there. Be patient with publishing your data, all right? Certainly, having a publication record, being able to document and establish research program is important, but be patient. A very key point, find out what you like. Develop a key line of research that builds upon other areas. And then additionally, basically the saying, Rome wasn't built in a day. Take your time, be patient with it. Establish faculty members that are publishing a lot, heavily involved. They get that way after several years, not after 1 or 2. All right, so find out what you're interested in and go with it. Network, volunteer, basically develop your professional identity pretty early. How do you do that? Come to conferences like this. Volunteer for committees. Volunteer to judge posters, present posters, attend state clinics, regional clinics, then national. Volunteer to speak. The NSCA has, I can't tell you how many opportunities have been extended to me to be able to build my career. And I highly encourage everyone to basically take advantage of those opportunities. And certainly, the more that you attend, the more that you get involved, it really does get to a point that kind of who you know certainly may help you.